Israel targets a school in Gaza, killing 12 people. At least 12 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a school housing displaced people in Gaza City, the Hamas-run Civil Defense Authority says. A spokesman says rescuers were struggling to recover a number of missing people believed to be trapped under the rubble at Mustafa Havez's school in the western Rimal neighborhood. The Israeli military said it had targeted a Hamas command and control center inside the school and that it had taken steps to mitigate risk of harming civilians. So, as you just heard in the quote, Israel said it was a Hamas control center. Do we really believe that? Now, this has been among a day of an Israeli bombing campaign as other airstrikes took place, pushing the total number of people killed to 52 Palestinians in the last 24 hours. Multiple Israeli airstrikes on Gaza have killed at least 52 Palestinians. The bombs targeted a school, a family home, a crowded area near a market, and a mobile phone charging point, among other places. Now, we have shockingly heard just a little bit, and I say a little bit, of sanity from an Israeli politician claiming that Netanyahu is sabotaging peace talks. Israeli opposition leader Yair Lapid said Netanyahu is trying to derail the Gaza ceasefire and prisoner exchange talks, adding that his attempts to sabotage the negotiations should stop. Enough with the briefings, enough with the tweets, enough with the rhymes in front of cameras, Lapid wrote in a post on Twitter. All of Netanyahu's attempts to sabotage the negotiations should stop. Deal now before they all die. Now, this comes after a peace deal was supposedly rejected by Hamas. I mean, pro-Israel voices have been claiming that once again, Hamas rejects peace. But it turns out that within the deal, there is no permanent ceasefire. Kevin, Yair Lapid, the opposition leader, telling the truth, it seems, that Netanyahu is sabotaging peace deals.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think this is significant? Is there a tide turning against Netanyahu? Or is this just politicking and it doesn't really mean very much?
I think the tide has been turning for quite some time against Netanyahu, and that in many respects has forced his hand in terms of scuppering the deal even further, because he realizes the only thing keeping him from being jailed, basically, for his corruption in Israel is the war and the continuation of the war cabinet. And the only thing holding that together is a lack of any credible peace talks. So he has to scupper them. We also know, in a bizarre twist, that Donald Trump has been telephoning Netanyahu, telling him not to do a peace deal before the November election, which, by the way, is illegal and technically counts as espionage on behalf of a foreign nation there, Donald. But we'll pass that over. Yes, the barbarity of the IDF just doesn't cease. It just doesn't stop. We saw those 12 people killed in a hospital, in a school that was already housing displaced and injured peoples. So they're literally doing a kind of human game hunting at this point, innocent human game hunting, where they're chasing people from side to side, murdering them. We saw another example from Deir al-Balah, the marketplace there. Another 8 people were killed. Deir al-Balah was a place where the IDF had told the residents there that they had to evacuate because they were going to target yet another Hamas place, because it's always Hamas. It's a joke at this point that they never show any evidence for it, and then when the eventual evidence does come out, it shows, oh, it wasn't a Hamas place to begin with. It never was. They told them to evacuate to a safe zone, quote unquote, that was already full, and they knew was already full. So they basically presented a fait accompli. They told them to evacuate to a place they couldn't evacuate from, and then they bombed it. That is just murder. That's just murder. It is a war crime. And yet the British government continue to sanction the sale of arms. The American government continue to sanction the sale of arms as well. And now the ultimate disgrace, I think, is Anthony Blinken going over there as a peacemaker and shifting the goalposts completely to the point where obviously Hamas can't agree to this because this isn't a ceasefire. Hamas have said, we will stick to the framework that Joe Biden publicly announced in July. We'll stick to that and we'll go from that point. Whereas now they've just completely ripped that up and said, no, actually, there's no permanent ceasefire. You just have to agree to everything. But apparently that's Hamas scuppering the deal somehow. I don't know how they're in control of this when it's literally the Israelis and Blinken that changed the fucking context of it. It's ridiculous. They just want to continue the same genocidal bullshit forever and ever, because that's the only way that the Netanyahu survives.
It's really interesting that you brought up that Donald Trump essentially committed espionage by saying to Netanyahu, don't resolve this issue before November, because there's a pattern here. I mean, Trump has done that before. Obviously this is mostly a British audience, so you might not be aware, but there was a standoff between Joe Biden and the federal government and Texas. Texas wanted to add barbed wire to some of their fences. Basically, they essentially wanted to kill people trying to cross the border. So obviously there was a bit of a standoff there. Now, Joe Biden, the federal government has complete control of the borders. They could have literally arrested the Texan authorities if they refused to enact the policies of the federal government. But instead, Biden worked with them, came up with a bill that was more restrictive on immigration, something that supposedly the GOP wants, and the Democrats voted for it, and Donald Trump instructed the GOP to vote against it because he wanted to keep that policy alive in order to attack Joe Biden, or now Kamala Harris. And it's the same again. It's playing politics with people's lives. It shows. And look, I want to say Kamala Harris is a completely flawed candidate. She absolutely... I think she's better on Palestine than Joe Biden, for example, but I completely understand those, especially Palestinians, saying, I don't want to vote for Kamala Harris, right? I get that. But for those that think about voting, I mean, look, if you're in America, think about not supporting Kamala Harris. Donald Trump is far worse on Israel. He's way more pro-Israel, extremely pro-Israel. So, I mean, it's not good enough from the Democrats, but people need to understand the GOP and Trump are extreme to the core.
Yeah. Well, we know that one of the main financial backers, along with Elon Musk, obviously, of Donald Trump was the widow of the late Sheldon Adelson, who was famous for making people sign a contract that said that they wanted to shrink the government to the size that it could fit inside a bathtub. That's how right wing he is, and was of course a massive Zionist as well. And his wife is no different, apparently. And one of the concessions she's gotten from Trump in order to financially back his campaign is that Israel will be allowed, in a second Trump term, to annex the entirety of the Gaza Strip. So if you think there's no substantive difference between the two on this, that's not true. I understand people not wanting to vote for Kamala Harris, understandably, given her ties to Genocide Joe. But if you're looking at genuine harm reduction, I think that's the idea of supporting someone like Donald Trump is just absolutely unacceptable.
And to go back to Netanyahu, I think potentially the dial has shifted on him personally, and I think that liberals will probably celebrate this, right? They'll say, well, this is really good, we're making progress. But the problem is, right, it's a system error here, right? It's you can dispose of Netanyahu. It doesn't mean that the genocide's going to go away. There has been a systematic oppression of the Palestinian people for the last 75 years. Netanyahu hasn't been in government that whole time. I think maybe the speed will be a bit slower if the opposition were to win, although I think we're expecting to see Netanyahu to win again. So I guess what does the picture look like? Let's say Netanyahu does manage to go because of international pressure. I mean, we're seeing Netanyahu fall out with David Lammy because he's ignoring him, because so far the Labour said they will back the ICC in an arrest warrant. But let's say Netanyahu's gone and someone else replaces him. Does that even change all that much?
Not really, in a sense that it's just going to be replaced with another hardcore Zionist. And actually, this is a much under-analysed part of the process, is that there's something deeply sick at the heart of Israeli society. Look at the parties they vote for. It's largely ultra-Zionist. Now, it's obviously not completely that. There are Arab parties. There is the Labour Party, which is still a Zionist party, but is at least vaguely sensible when it comes to actually trying to get a negotiated peace settlement and all the rest of it. There are other, decent individuals here and there, but they vote consistently for scum. And I use that word completely advisedly. the awful dregs of humanity, to the point where, I mean, who would even replace him? Someone like Naftali Bennett or someone like that? Like, they're
Who's
awful.
incredibly deranged individual
Yeah, they're
himself. I mean,
all
he
they're
called babies, the Palestinian babies, essentially Nazis. It's like, well, they're going to grow
yeah,
up to be Nazis anyway.
exactly.
Absolutely insane stuff.
If you get rid of him, it doesn't like topple the dictator and then someone
Sure.
cool comes in. It's just going to be yet another piece of shit. The only slight ray of hope in it is that it's a piece of shit whose entire political project isn't just carrying on the war, which gives you some latitude for hopefully maybe some settlement at some point, or at least a calming of tensions, even if a settlement isn't formally sort of reached. Because they don't have to rely on the war continuing to remain as prime minister, which is the case currently with Netanyahu. So, I mean, but that's a very, very, I'm desperately reaching there for a straw. And it's ultimately, it's just going to be replaced with yet another genocidal lunatic. Because again, there's something deeply corrupted at the heart of Israeli society. I don't know how to fix that or how to even begin to try and fix it, but they keep voting for evil bastards, and that's a problem.
I mean, there is obviously a lack of genuine choice. Let's be honest, but you are right. I mean, if you look at polling and
the fact that they keep assassinating people who dare to,
they also keep killing those that actually oppose meaningfully.
Yeah.
But if you look at polls and people's views in Israel, they are very, very worrying, to say the least, about their attitudes towards Palestinians. And I think obviously that goes along with the entire media. I mean, we've got a lot of our media over here that are pro-Israel. Just think how much worse it is over in Israel itself.
Yeah.
That is essentially the establishment way of thinking. Now, I want go on. You about?
I was just going to say, there's also not the external pressure of the potential for stepping over the line, because they know that America has their back, so they can step over the line as much as they like. It's not like with, say, North Korea, where international sanctions actually get applied to them, so there are repercussions for their actions. Israel can do whatever it likes, knowing it has the world's basically sole superpower at this point. China is on the rise, we get that, but like, they're not going to challenge America meaningfully in that respect. So America basically will sign a blank check for them every time. Like, it's so funny to me when you see Biden going about like meaningful change. We're going to get meaningful change. We're going to have a ceasefire, and Netanyahu just laughs at him and goes, "Sign the fucking check, Joe.
Yeah,
just sign the check and give me the fucking weapons. I don't give a shit." Like, they know that they can't do anything wrong, and so there's no outward external force to place moderation into the discussion, because they can do whatever they like with a blank check.
I mean, you can't play nice. You can't say, "Oh, I really want to ceasefire," and they go, "Oh, okay." Then you do have to essentially play hardball with them. It will be very interesting to see if Kamala Harris does win. Again, I'm not saying that the Democratic Party are exactly pro-Palestinian, but it is worth noting that she was one of the first people to call for a ceasefire. Again, I know it's the bare minimum, but couple that with Labour, again, who are not nowhere near good enough on this issue, have slightly shifted in their policy. They at least are wax lyrical about banning arms. Again, if you look in the detail there, they say they're going to ban offensive weapons, which, I mean, let's be honest, Israel are going to say everything's defensive, right? It's not good enough. But
what's a defensive weapon exactly?
Exactly. But it was positive to see that Labour said they would back the ICC if there was an arrest warrant. So it would be interesting to see that Kamala Harris, who I do think is better on Palestine than Joe Biden, and a slight shift in the Labour Party, you're seeing a bit more of a sink when it comes to US and the UK. Potentially could add pressure, but maybe that's just being optimistic.
I think you are being optimistic. I think we've seen there are so many holes in the Labour Party's supposed maybe sometime in the near future getting rid of arms sales to Israel. It's like Swiss cheese. They'll be able to pick their way through that, no problem.
True.
America, they try and make a noise, but that's because there's an election coming up. We know that fundamentally Joe Biden is a Zionist. I don't think actually Kamala Harris isn't a Zionist either. She's just slightly more distanced from it because she's been vice president, which is the equivalent of having a child in the corner coloring with a coloring book and some crayons. Like, it doesn't do anything. But you have to take some responsibility as vice president for the actions of the president. You were a part of that ticket. You didn't at any point resign. You take that to some degree on yourself. I think she understands that there is a groundswell of opinion in the United States, which has moved against Israel, or at least against this current war. And so they need to be given signs before the election that they're looking towards a ceasefire. But really, it's too late now to get a ceasefire, I think, before the election.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.